Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the April 2022 meeting of the Park Hill Civic Association. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We're going to start our meeting this evening by asking people to introduce themselves and say what street they live on in the neighborhood. And we'll start with Mary Clive.
Hi, I'm Mary Clive. I live on Fleetwood Terrace. I met Lorig when she came knocking on my door the other day. It was very lovely. Thank you.
Gary Klauber.
Well, I live on Bonifant Street, right at the corner of Dale Drive.
Thank you, Gary. Kelly McCullough.
I'm Kelly McCullough. I live on Mansfield Road.
Yeah, right. Hi, Kelly.
Well,
Hi, Jean.
thank you. Chris Richardson, you're next.
Chris Richardson, Deerfield Avenue, just down the street from Allen.
Carol Gilbert.
The 500 block of Bonifant, just down the street from Gary. And Alan, while I've got you, can we get the minutes approved right now?
Okay. Jean Walker.
I'm Jean Walker. I live on Mansfield Road.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Jean. Lori Kaplan.
Hi, Lori Kaplan, Dale Drive, right near the entrance of Fleetwood. Hi, Lorig. It's been a while.
Wendy.
Wendy Caswell, I live on Dartmouth.
Thank you, Wendy. Nice to see you. David.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm also on Mansfield Road, and I'm happy to see some of my neighbors. I feel like our street is well represented here.
Absolutely. Paul Guinnessy.
I'm on Deerfield, as everyone probably knows, and it lived up to its name today because I had two deer hiding from the purple line, sitting down in my grass for most of it.
And Nina, introduce yourself and tell us where you live.
Hi, this is Nina. I live on Dale.
Okay, it's Nina Vucinic, who is our treasurer. Without further ado, we're so fortunate this evening to have as our guest Maryland State Delegate Lorig Charkoudian, one of the most productive, outstanding leaders in the Maryland General Assembly. She's been very good to our neighborhood, and we're very happy that she could join us this evening to tell us something about the 2022 General Assembly session and to talk about her work representing us with regard to the Maryland Transit Administration, the State Highway Administration with regard to Dale Drive. So Lorig, welcome.
Great. Well, thank you. It is an honor to represent all of you. Before I get started, Carol, were you saying that you need to approve minutes? Is that what you said? I wasn't sure if that had to happen before I started talking.
It can either happen now or it can happen at the end, whatever Alan wants to do.
Oh, okay. Alan, you want me to just keep going?
I want you to keep going because we didn't circulate the minutes for people to approve them. So we'll do that first.
Okay,
we'll do you first.
Well, then here we go. So I will, we had a 90-day session. I think folks are fairly familiar with how this works. We had a 90-day session. We considered, 2,500 bills. And so a lot happened. What I'm going to do is highlight a couple of key things, a few things that relate sort of specifically to District 20 and the immediate community, and then I'll shift to some of the Wayne Avenue Purple Line construction, school zone sorts of issues. But I will stop along the way, and I now, because I'm spotlighted, I actually can't see everybody. So if you have a question, shoot it into the chat, or feel free to just start, if you just kind of interrupt me or stick your hand up or something, and we can stop along the way. So I do a lot of work on, and I serve on the committee that does a lot of work on climate and energy. And so I'll start with that. In terms of climate, we passed a really significant piece of legislation, Climate Solutions Now, which sets the net zero statewide emission goals to net zero by 2045. There's a lot of really important elements that passed in that bill. I will say it fell short of, my expectations of what we need to do around building electrification and phasing out natural gas. We'll have to come back and do those pieces, but it did a lot of really good things, and including incorporating my bill on distribution system planning, which is little bit wonky and technical, but it's really crucial to our ability to get more distributed energy, which is the solar storage, the stuff that happens sort of on a small scale in our homes. So that passed in Climate Solutions Now. Two other ones of my own bills that I want to highlight in the climate area that passed that I think are significant. One is increasing our investment in low-income energy efficiency. So while Climate Solutions increased energy efficiency programming overall for the whole state, historically our energy efficiency programming and investments have been really inequitable. And so more of the money has gone to higher income individuals, and less of the money has gone to lower income individuals who struggle even more to pay their electric bills. So my bill, HB 108 that passed after 3 years, ensures equitable goals and increases our investment in low-income energy efficiency. Similarly, on the climate justice side of things, my other bill that expands clean energy microgrids in low-income communities, and these are resiliency hubs. They're designed to ensure resiliency when the entire grid goes down, that you would have a community center in a low-income community that would have the ability to island from the grid, continue providing heating and cooling, and in a place for people to store their medication, plug in electrical, medical equipment, and so on. So those were a couple of big bills on the climate side. I want to shift to the Time to Care Act. So this was really significant. This is our paid family leave. This bill folks have been working on this bill since before I was elected, and I've been working on advocating for it since I was elected 4 years ago. And this establishes a paid family medical leave insurance program for the state, which will allow people to take 12 weeks off with the partial reimbursement of their income, and protect their jobs during that period, and allow the employer to be able to hire a replacement because they won't have to pay for the paid leave. So really significant from the perspective of supporting families, supporting small businesses who don't have the ability to provide this without this program. Now we'll have the ability to do it. So that was another really significant win this year. In terms of health, we actually made progress on a number of really important areas. In terms of reproductive health care access, we increased access to abortion care by providing supports for practitioners, training programs, and expanding Medicaid coverage. In terms of Medicaid, we also expanded dental coverage. And this is a really important piece because you all may know, but dental coverage, Medicaid hadn't covered preventative dental care, and preventative dental care, of course, is crucial to preventing so many other medical issues. And so this is another area where healthcare advocacy groups have been advocating for years and years and years. And this year we finally got that bill over the finish line. My bill to strengthen mobile crisis units and require 911 systems to develop policies that triage mobile crisis units passed this year, as well as another behavioral crisis bill setting up the structure for 988, which will be like it's the suicide hotline, but more broadly addressing mental health crises, and an easy 988 number instead of having to remember the full Lifelines number. My bill to protect folks in terms of medical debt protection. I've done a lot of work on that area, and this year my bill passed that requires hospitals to pay back. The research that came out of my medical debt legislation found that over the last 5 years, hospitals have collected quite $60 million a year from patients who are eligible for free care. So this bill sets up a process and requires the hospitals to pay that back. I'm going to move quickly through these. We did some more investment in education. You may know that the Blueprint for Maryland's Future was a really significant bill that we passed 2 years ago. We've continued to invest in that and strengthen that and refine that, especially in light of the need to increase investments to make sure that folks, some of the learning loss, and especially the inequitable learning loss that sort of furthered the opportunity gap, investing in schools in a way that addresses a lot of those issues that came out of COVID, as well as a really hefty increase in public school construction funding. So with the hope that we'll catch up on, a lot of our public school construction, as you probably know, is is quite a bit behind. Relatedly, we actually passed a number of bills related to childcare. And so I think, many of us have been aware of and advocating around the childcare crisis for years and years and years. And COVID, of course, like with many other challenges that we face as a society, COVID sort of laid bare the issues around childcare and made the problem worse, but also highlighted just this the details unless folks have specific questions, but there's a number of both grant programs, revolving loan programs, and other sorts of programs that expand access and including bonuses for childcare providers to support right now employee retention and new hire bonuses. In terms of housing, this year we passed a number of bills that, if you've been following the General Assembly over the last few years, there had been the hope that we would put into place a number of protections for renters. They hadn't passed or they had passed without funding. And so this year we have additional funding for access to counsel and evictions, and requiring that if somebody is receiving federal rental assistance, landlords have to accept those funds, that they can't choose not to accept the federal assistance. In terms of criminal justice issues, probably the most significant one is the cannabis reform. So HB 1 puts legal cannabis on the ballot for constitutional amendment. You'll have an opportunity to vote on that this fall. And then parallel to that, we passed a bill, which was HB 837, that created kind of the legal framework that will, there'll still be more additional legal structures we'll have to put in place after the constitutional amendment passes this fall, assuming it passes. But we started to put those into place, including significant amount of expungement expunging the convictions of people who were found guilty in the past for marijuana possession, which is a really important piece to repairing the harm of the really detrimental war on drugs. In terms of food systems, I think folks probably know I do a lot of work on food systems and equitable food systems. A number of bills passed that support urban farming, and then my bill, the Farm to Food Security Act, passed, and that invests more money into the Maryland market money, which doubles the value of federal nutrition benefits at farmers markets. It created a farm to food bank fund so that our food banks can purchase directly from our local farms, supporting both healthier, fresh food as well as supporting our local farmers. And it creates, although it didn't fund, a farm to school grant program. So we'll have to keep working on those funds in the future. In terms of transportation, we passed some good legislation, and then this was my biggest heartbreak of the session, was around my Safe Roads Act. So I'll start with the stuff we passed. We passed a bill requiring equity in transportation and transit, requiring the Department of Transportation to incorporate equity into transportation plans, reports, and goals, and so on. We passed the bill to require MTA to make long and short-term investments in rail infrastructure and establish long-term goals related to sort of in some of the MARC lines that have been on the books for a while and haven't moved. And then we did pass the Vision Zero implementation, which is requires more transparency on the data around crashes, and especially fatal pedestrian bicycle crashes. My bill, which you might have heard about, is the Safe Roads Act, which would have really forced the State Highway Administration to incorporate pedestrian safety features in all of the work that they do, as well as require them to increase the amount of money they put into the spot improvements for pedestrian safety. So like when a sidewalk needs to be repaired or a hawk signal needs to be installed, and require that as we get federal money, a significant portion of that goes to pedestrian safety. You would have thought it might be a no-brainer, especially since right before the end of session, tragically, we lost a 7-year-old child waiting for the bus. It wasn't on a state road, but it sort of highlighted the need for design for pedestrian safety. This bill passed out of the House before crossover, and we just couldn't get it out of Senate. So I intend to bring something along those lines back next year. And I, as you may know, will keep fighting for both piecemeal the work that's like, take this intersection and take this road stretch and advocate with the State Highway Administration. But really what I was hoping to do with the bill, and what I will keep working on legislatively, is to change the structures so that the SHA's decision-making is grounded in the right sort of lens as it relates to pedestrian safety, rather than waiting until, all of us send them multiple emails to start to pay attention to these issues. We actually had one other local bill that I wanted to mention actually is folks may be aware of some of the issues around the bid, the Business Improvement District in Silver Spring. And one of the concerns that was raised by a lot of the local businesses was that the structure of it was undemocratic and excluded small businesses, tenant businesses, from a structural role in decision-making. Their input was sort of dependent on the choice of property owners to listen to them. So because the state law essentially creates the framework for the local bid, I changed the state law that sort of requires more inclusive processes. There's still the need for the county council to approve of the revised board of directors and election and so on, the revised bylaws of the Silver Spring bid. But the new state framework will sort of force a more inclusive process for that to happen. And my bill becomes retroactive, so it does affect the bid that already exists, but they have a year to come into compliance. In terms of money, it was actually the first time in everyone's recollection that we had a good year in terms of money, sort of a combination of having a better than expected revenues combined with federal money that we actually had a really good budget year. And so for the first time since I've been there and since I've been paying attention, there weren't significant cuts that had to be made. We actually were able to fund a lot of things, including capital projects. And so there's a number of local capital projects. Most significantly, I would say that we got $2.5 million overall for the bond for funding for the Long Branch parks within the Long Branch area. And then some very specific pieces, the Claiborne Trail Bridge replacement, the Long Branch Arliss Neighborhood Park, and a few others. And in addition, we got funding for, I won't go into all of them, but things like the Adventist Community Services, who needed to upgrade their external area where they do food distribution, and they've really been a lifeline for so many families in our community. So for them and further in East County, some food distribution structures that need to be funded. So those are some of the big highlights of the legislative session. There was obviously a whole lot more, and we passed, 800, 900 bills. So before I move on to local issues around Wayne Avenue, I'll actually stop and see if anyone has any questions or comments about some of the legislative work that we did this year. Okay.
Well, thanks, Lorig. I'd unmute myself. Thank you for that really comprehensive tour of what the General Assembly did. I did have some questions about cannabis and about the surplus and what you're going to do with it. So let me ask you this: why? I never really understood this. Doesn't seem like other states, other jurisdictions had gone for a constitutional amendment to legalize cannabis. I wonder why we do that in Maryland, and whether or not you think that it's going to bring in all the revenues that people would like to see.
I actually don't sort of leadership decision making about how, there's kind of been this consensus that we're moving towards legalizing cannabis, but why do it on a ballot as opposed to just do it by legislation, which we have the ability to do. We don't have to do it by ballot. I actually don't know, because those were happening in conversations that were not, it was the conversations to the extent they were more in the judiciary and judicial proceedings committee. So I think there's, advantages to either approach, but that's the one that we were sort of presented with. And I don't oppose I don't oppose the idea of the ballot initiative. It does make it move a little bit more slowly than I might think is appropriate, but I don't oppose it. I will say that I think there's an expectation of some revenue will come from it in the same way that you get revenue from anything that we are taxing. At this point, the conversation, at least amongst my colleagues, is not that this is some kind of a panacea that we're expecting is going to be the way that we solve, school funding or something like that, if that's what you're asking. I mean, really very different actually from when we were having conversations like around gambling, when some revenue that comes with it, but I would say it's pretty different from an expectation that's tied to then, oh, that this is how we're going to solve this problem. And I think that that's right, because I think that there are states, while it is a useful source of revenue, there are states that's not the reason necessarily that's not the only reason that I support legalization. And there's certainly been states that have, looked to it to solve budget problems, and that's not kind of necessarily the outcome.
David's got his hand raised. David, you have a question for Lorig?
Can you see me? Yes. I was curious about so the governor is a Republican, and I'm very impressed, as I'm sure many of us are, with just that brief list of all of the things that you've accomplished. My understanding is that in many cases, the legislature can override his veto. Has that been an issue in this session? I haven't been paying close attention. And have there been any particular ones that where his veto was sustained and that was a major problem? I mean, I assume that you would prefer to have a Democratic governor, and that would allow you to pass more of your priorities. But I'm curious how much of an issue that was this year.
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. And it is so a couple things. We did override, I think it was 9 or 10 of his vetoes this year. What normally happens, and actually it could still be a problem. So here's the way it works. Normally you have your legislative session, it ends on sine die, and then the governor has whatever it is, 45 days, maybe it's 50 days, whatever it is, to sign bills or veto bills. And then he vetoes bills. And then when you come back into session the following year, we spend the first few days overriding the veto. So in the past, there's been like 30, 40 vetoes we're overriding when we come back together. During an election year, because it's a different body that's going to be convened in January, we can't override any vetoes. And so we actually had to take some of the really significant bills that we knew he was going to veto. So for example, Paid Family Leave Act, the Abortion Access Act, in fact, the rail, the transportation, the rail expansion act, some of those other things that we knew he was going to veto, we actually had to present to him 10 days before the end of session. So we had to pass them early, expecting his veto. He vetoed them, and then we spent the last day or two overriding his vetoes, and we did on a number of things. We did expect a veto actually on the Climate Solutions Now, which he didn't veto, which must mean that it's polling well. But I will say it does affect the legislature, even though we have the majority to override his vetoes. It does mean that we need a larger majority to get a bill passed that we're expecting to be vetoed. And I also expect that he will veto some additional bills between now and his deadline of 40 days from now. And we won't be able to override them. We'll just have to introduce them again next year because of what I just described. And so that's, it slows down progress. We'll still get it done, but it slows down progress. Does that answer your question?
Thanks. Yes, thanks.
Anybody else has questions, put them in the chat or raise your hand electronically. You covered most of the things that I had on my list to ask you when you went back and talked about Long Branch and when you talked about the Silver Spring bid. But I did want to come back and ask you about the surplus. So do we still have billions of dollars in state surplus that's available for use by the governor or has there been some talk about distributing that to Maryland taxpayers in some kind of, tax abatement refund or something like that?
Yeah, so we used the surplus. There's not billions of dollars sitting around. So short answer is no. We did use the surplus in a number of ways. First of all, we established a structural, we were working under a structural deficit. So we're constitutionally required to have a balanced budget every year, but you can have a balanced budget and a structural deficit. So you're going to have to you're going to be in trouble in a couple of years, and then you're going to have to cut, right? So we addressed the structural deficit. We put enough money in the rainy day fund. So like we're in a very healthy budget position. So should we hit a recessionary period in the next few years, things will be tight, but they won't be catastrophic. So that's one really important thing we did. The second thing that we did is a lot of the things that I was just describing, things like catching up on school construction. So when you have this kind of a surplus, one of the goals is to put a lot of that money into infrastructure, because you have this chance to catch up on infrastructure investments, because those are kind of one-time spending. When you do a tax cut, which we did a retiree tax cut, but when you do a tax cut, that is a long-term budget decision, right? And so while some of the tax cuts that were proposed that we didn't pass would have worked fine for like the next 4 years, after we run out of this surplus period, we would have had trouble sustaining them, and we would have had to cut services and somewhere along the lines. So instead, there's this decision to invest more in infrastructure. That's a big piece of it. And then also you saw things like the childcare investments, right? So putting money into a revolving loan fund, right? Where that'll be money that'll be there over time, or putting money into bonus payments to keep childcare employees there, putting money into bonus payments to, we also did bonuses for like bus drivers and school support staff and those kinds of folks, where it's been really hard to keep people. There's sort of folks are short staffed in those areas. You might have heard about the bus driver crisis that we've had, combination of not having enough bus drivers, plus with COVID, people staying not able to get to work. And so in January, you probably know that there were like several bus routes that MCPS couldn't run. So I would say it's sort of a combination of all of those things. So there was a tax cut for seniors within a certain bracket, retirees. But for the most part, you sort of will see it in higher levels of short-term investments in these various things. And there's not, I think that at this point, the governor has like some ARPA money, not billions, maybe a couple million ARPA money left that he still could sort of discretionary spend. But for the most part, we've spent down for this year the budget, and then next year will be a healthy budget year. It won't be a surplus budget year, but it'll be a healthy budget year because of the way that we structured what we did this year.
There's a question for Christine in the chat. How's Maryland doing on electric grid development? Along the same lines, I'm curious if there are any discussions about incentivizing corporations to install charging centers at their office locations.
Christine, did you hear me talk about the my distribution system planning bill? Because this is like my favorite topic. And it is, I think if you're talking about the distribution system, and I'll try to spare folks too much detail, but since it was asked, I get to go into way more detail than I might otherwise. So, what we do with the distribution system is really crucial. Like how PEPCO invests in the poles and the wires is going to be a make or break of whether we can put enough charging stations in, whether we can put enough distributed solar, and whether we can put enough storage in, whether we're going to meet our goals. And there's also some really creative stuff happening in some parts of the country, even some parts of Maryland, where you can use people's hot water heaters aggregated and sold into the grid as an ancillary service or as a storage service to balance the load during certain times of the day. And these are all ways to, as our dependence We can minimize our peak load dependence, minimize our dependence on fossil fuels. Like there's all kinds of really creative stuff we can do with the grid. But because Pepco and BG&E own the grid, they're regulated monopolies, but they own the grid. And so their investments in the grid are based on essentially what they can earn a rate of return on. They're not necessarily based on how we can meet state policy goals, right? So what distribution system planning requires, and what my bill, which was folded into the Climate Solutions Now, requires, is that we've established all these state policy goals related to charging stations, EVs, distributed energy, peak shavings, energy efficiency, equity, all of these things, and requires that the planning that they do, that the utilities have to be more transparent, and they have to plan and invest in a way that supports meeting the state's goals. So it gets complicated and not very transparent at the Public Service Commission level. Well, what the bill does is it requires that to be more transparent. The second thing that it does is that there's an interesting dynamic where you've got a lot of the Department of Energy in the infrastructure bill has a couple $2 billion for grid upgrades. Now, most of the time when there's a grid upgrade, ratepayers pay for it, right? So Pepco pays for it, earns a rate of return, and we all pay with our rates that rate of return plus the original cost. When the federal government pays for those upgrades, that means we're not paying for them, right? But that also means that Pepco doesn't get a rate of return. So the utilities actually have zero incentive to apply for that money and get that money, because that's money that they don't earn a rate of return on. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to go after any of it. But one of the things that my bill did was require, and does, because it got put into this other bill, requires that the utilities go after that federal money. And so we can ramp up our upgrades to the distribution grid, while at the same time getting as much federal money as possible, meaning that we're saving ratepayers millions and millions of dollars over the course of the next 5 years. So there's really exciting stuff happening there. Now, in terms of charging stations, I have to look back. We didn't do that this year, but I think there may be some kind of incentives in the MEA grants for charging stations. But I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
I asked that simply because it's a great place while your car's sitting for hours, a great place to charge, and the infrastructure still isn't built out quite well to encourage more people to buy into electric vehicles.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of work that we need to do. There's a lot of work that we need to do to get more charging infrastructure out there. And I think corporations and office locations is a piece of it. The other piece of it, and this is why we sort of put some equity language specifically in the bill, is like this sort of chicken and egg thing around lower income communities where there may be a slower uptick of purchasing, and where people may have less of an ability to have a sort of a single family home charging station. And so making sure that there's equity in the distribution of it. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff. And Paul, that's exciting. You wrote about this recently in Physics Today. So cool. I'll take a look at that.
I missed the first couple minutes of your call. So if I asked a redundant question, I apologize.
No, it wasn't redundant, Christine. I was just so excited because it's rare. Usually I'll mention that I did this work on distribution system planning and people kind of go, that sounds nice, but it's rare that I get someone that excited about it. So thank you.
Thank you for that question, Christine. Chris Richardson, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a quick question. There's been a lot of reports, some true, maybe some of them misunderstandings about gun violence and other nighttime activities in downtown Silver Spring that seems to be on the increase. At least that's the perception. I know we're addressing this at the local level, wondering if there's any discussion or any reaction that can be done at the state level.
Thank you. Yes, the one bill that I did want to mention that I didn't mention was the ghost gun regulation. So that was actually a really big deal. We've had that bill and it hasn't moved the last few years. And then of course, the use of ghost guns are, if you don't know, it's like you sort of purchase a kit online essentially and assemble the gun yourself. And so there's no regulatory framework for it. So obviously, even with guns that are registered, there's a, illegal market for them, but there was sort of no regulatory framework at all for ghost guns, which then whether they were stolen or whatever was in the, used in the commission of a crime, it was impossible to sort of track them down. So we passed a bill that regulates ghost guns, and that's really important. I don't know specifically of the Silver Spring shootings, but I do know that the shooting that happened at the Montgomery County School, I think it was maybe in December, it was a ghost gun. It was a gun that the student had assembled himself off of one of these kits. So, and I know that in Baltimore, when I've looked at some of the homicide data, they're saying a lot of those are also ghost guns. So that's really significant. In terms of the locals, I'll tell you the role of the state and what I have done in those conversations. So this is not specific to legislation, but in trying to understand what all the issues are in the within the sort of late night, in particular late night shootings, and the issues around some of the hookah bars, the issues around some of the sort of the facilities that are open very late and what's going on there. And so I actually, where there is some intersection, the vast majority of that is local enforcement. But there is tobacco is regulated at the state level. So it is questions about hours of operation are county level decisions, but in terms of like taxes and what kind of a hookah is or isn't legal to use, or what tobacco, whatever, that kind of thing, that's regulated at the state level. And so I reached out to the tobacco, I'm blanking on the name of the agency now, but it's the state. It used to be in the comptroller's office, and it got separated out a couple of years ago. But it's the state agency that regulates tobacco and alcohol, and I asked them what they could do to help, because some of these issues were around regulated tobacco facilities. And so I brought them in, and at this point, it's my understanding that there is a task force that's doing enforcement. And it's got a range of folks involved. It's under the, I talked to the Commander McBain recently about it. There's a number of agencies that are involved. And because of this conversation I had, we've now got the state tobacco folks involved. And so that's kind of, there's also like fire marshals. And I mean, there's a number of people really looking broadly at ensuring safety at all levels. But the tobacco folks are able to come in and address the stuff that's related to the regulation. I will say, I think that the hours of operation is a really key piece of it, and there's nothing that we can do at the state level on that. So I do hope that locally county kind of moves on that as well. But I did bring the tobacco folks in, and I understand they've identified a number of issues and cited a number of issues, and so that's part of the bigger kind of framework of this.
Thank you for everything that you do.
Thanks.
I just wanted to follow up on the sort of the alcohol aspects of that. Did General Assembly discuss anything about permitting the sale of beer and wine in supermarkets? That issue comes up periodically, and it's one that people seem to be really interested in.
I know it is very popular. Unfortunately, that bill did not pass. That is, we actually hear that bill every year, and it's a combination of political forces that make it difficult to pass that, but that bill did not pass. I think it's gaining traction. I'll say that. So in time, but the alcohol bills are very complicated. They're not complicated. Our alcohol structure in the state, it's like we had prohibition, and then we changed like literally one block of the state at a time. It's a very unusual set of policies. So I don't want to go too far into it right now, but if someone's interested in that issue, I mean, broadly, how we regulate alcohol in the state, I'm happy to have another conversation with them. But
well, you're a great person to pick your brain. So I'm going to ask you two questions. The first one is, one of the things that some of my colleagues were really interested in was artificial turf and safe playing fields and chain of custody for the material when they take it away from a high school or something like that. Did the chain of custody bill pass? And is there a lot of interest or some interest of that in the General Assembly.
I don't think that bill passed.
Well, that's good.
Sometimes the reason I'm hesitating is sometimes that bill comes to us in economic matters, and sometimes it's in environment and transportation. So I know that we did not pass a bill related to that, but I'd have to look and see if I somehow missed it, if it passed out of ENT, but I don't think so.
Okay, I'll look it up as well. And then the other question I wanted to ask is, a lot of the conversation at the local level among our neighbors has to do with affordable housing. And I know you talked about right to counsel and tenants' rights. Did the General Assembly take up to the sort of the broader issue of state support of affordable housing at the county level? Because it's of real interest to the community.
Yeah. I would say that we did not do that in a really effective way. I think affordable housing is a tough one that I have not seen really good progress on, significant progress on at the state level. I mean, our work in the last since I've been there, not ever, but since I've been there, our work has kind of been on the tenant protection side of things, which became particularly important under COVID, just because, you know, so many people weren't able to pay their rent. We also did have we do have, if folks need it, in addition to tenant supports, there is a funding available to help people pay their mortgages if they're having trouble staying in their home and risking foreclosure due to COVID. So both of those are things. If you go to, there's a part of my website that lists resources that are available. So if you can't find it there, you can reach out to me, but that's up there as well. So that's really been focused on just kind of stability, keeping people in their homes, whether tenants or homeowners. You know, there's been work, and I've done some work on other ways to sort of support people to be able to kind of pay their bills, like around energy assistance and those kinds of things. But in terms of developing more affordable housing, I would say I haven't seen anything that really moves the needle on that. And that one is a little tricky because it sort of is a combination of, it's like there's federal tax credits and we need more of that. You know, that really is the driver of building affordable housing. There's some role that the state plays in distributing them across the state, those tax credits. And then a lot of it is local policy related to planning, zoning, and requirements around like MDPUs and so on within any development that happens. And so, so I'm not trying to say there's not a role for the state, but I would say that there's a significant, I haven't seen that role kind of, that leverage really pushed. And I'm not sure exactly what it would be beyond like investment, but so I don't feel like I have a really good answer, or solution, or even direction on that one at this time.
I don't think many people doing that part of the conversation has been missing. They've been talking about attainable housing, preserving existing housing, MPDUs, but nobody's really dealing with the sort of the transcendent issue of affordable housing. And I thought with the budget surplus, at least at the beginning of several $1 billion, one of the things they could have done was created some kind of revolving fund where counties would get $200 million and be able to leverage that the way they do on Wall Street to create affordable housing. I just haven't seen any serious conversations about that. So I just wanted to ask you, because you would know. Why don't we switch the conversation to our hyper local level and talk about Wayne Avenue and Dale Drive and some of the conversations that you have had with the State Highway and MTA, and Kelly can jump in and talk about some of the conversations and correspondence she's had with State Highway, I believe, Kelly. So Lori, do you want to lead off with some of that? And if you could make a reference to Ida's tree and whether or not we'll be able to keep the tree throughout the summer, that would be very helpful.
Okay.
Sorry, the tree.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like I need to say I'm sorry, but it's really hard to sort of be the state rep and have these agencies that frankly answer to the governor, but have it be so difficult to get these agencies to respond, even to me, but also to the community. I think just a couple pieces of context. I know several of you are activists working on this issue, but some of you may not be. So I just want to highlight a couple things that I think are important for context. The first is that the MTA, so there's MDOT, which is the Maryland Department of Transportation. Under MDOT is MTA, which is the Maryland Transit Authority, and SHA, which is the State Highway Administration. And they are actually different divisions of MDOT. And then MTA is sort of above and managing, but for the purple line, but the purple line is theoretically a public-private partnership. And if there ever was an example of why big transportation projects shouldn't be done under public-private partnership, purple line would be Exhibit A, but nonetheless, the governor's trying to do it again with highway widening. Come back to that later.
Hear, hear.
And it has been, an unmitigated disaster. And I mean, this particular public-private partnership, the way it's been managed and so on. And so it's, you may know that the Purple Line Transit Partners, who were the contractors, sued the state, walked off the job, and left us holding the bag for the money, even though theoretically the idea behind a public-private partnership was that they would take the money. Also further delaying it by a few more years, new contract goes out, the RFP, but the decision that was made was that while the RFP process was going forward, the MTA would continue to do some of the work. Some of the subcontractors were still on the job. And so MTA would continue to do some of the work during that period, specifically utility relocation. Was the primary thing that MTA was going to continue to oversee until the new company was on board to manage the project again. And so that's kind of where we have been. So we were with the Purple Line Transit Partners for a while. They walked off the job sometime about a year ago, maybe a little more than that. Now we've been working with MTA. And there is a new contractor. They sort of are partially starting now, but they haven't officially become responsible. So it's still MTA that we're talking to right now. And I've been in touch with them, and I've said, as soon as we have this new person, I want to engage with them and start to lay out what these issues have been. So as it relates to Wayne Avenue, I would just say, my primary role is to get them to pay attention to issues that you all raise. I mean, there's been a handful of issues I've seen myself, but mostly people reach out to me. I do try to run in that area so that I can keep an eye on stuff, but you all live there. And so really I depend more on reports from folks who live there. So let me start with the road, and my issues that I've tried to raise with them is the issue of this is a place people walk and bike, and there's a school, and you've got to do this construction work in a way that honors that and keeps everybody safe. And, we've seen, both sidewalks closed at the same time. So there's no place for people to walk. We've seen entire road stretches closed, and I'm telling you stuff that you all know, but where there's a bus stop and no sign of where to pick up the bus stop. And so some of my work has been very kind of whack-a-mole, hey, I'm here today, I'm looking at this, and can you come and fix this? Some of it has been really much more long-term, and I don't know who's been copied on which emails, but I really started asking them to lay out at the very beginning of a certain portion of the project, what they're doing to look for where the pedestrian walk, sites direction is going to be, and so on. Most recently, I was advocating around the repaving, and their position had been, well, we're continuing to do the work, so until the work's done, we're not going to repave. And I've just said that it's unacceptable that you can't expect a community to, on a project that's delayed 5 years, continue to drive on roads like that. So they finally did repave. Now it's getting torn up again and they'll have to repave again, but at least it's a little bit better. And similarly, I've got a commitment from them to do that on Piney Branch between Arliss and University. And I'm working on a commitment on University itself. So, so that's kind of another piece of what I've worked on. Now, on the tree issue, I don't actually have an answer. They're supposed to send an arbor on specifically that one tree that you asked me about, Alan. There's supposed to be an arborist who's going to come out. I feel like on that one, more of what I was able to get was answers and timelines than specific commitments to save the trees. But that particular tree, we'll talk about the tree summit in just a second. But you know, sometimes I'm able to get clarity or answers when, you know, for whatever reason, folks in the community aren't able to get it. And I'm happy to play that role to the extent that I can do that. I'll stop there on construction. I want to talk about the schools. I'm going to talk about the SHA and the school zone issue. I have an answer on that. And I also want to talk about trees more broadly, tree replacement. But let me start while I'm on the pedestrian safety, that piece of it. Let me just see if folks have questions about that.
Well, I want to thank you for pushing them for the restriping and the paving, because it looked like we were going to have to live with that situation for the next 4 years, and it is much better. It does come with the downside that a smoother road surface makes people drive faster.
Yep.
And so, but it's a mixed blessing. But thank you so much for getting their attention. They need to be, sort of knocked upside the head about a lot of these issues. We thought that the pedestrian safety issues had become a priority. At least they tell us in all of our emails that pedestrian safety is our number one concern.
Number one.
And then they
Number
block,
one.
and then they block, both sidewalks, and they don't put up any signage. And it really is quite frustrating. So thank you for the paving and the striping, because it sort of brings a little bit of normalcy back to a neighborhood which is still in a great deal of distress. So I wanted to thank you about that. So yeah, we'd love to hear about the larger tree issue, because, and I've got some, after Lorig speaks, I did put together a little slideshow for us, which shows in 2008, Chris, you'll appreciate this, what Mike Madden and MTA promised us in terms of a graphic of what the completed purple line would look like. And a subsequent artist conception that they've done. I also have got some video of the trees on the school property. So those of you who are new, you will see what our concern is. But walking up Wayne Avenue, and especially as the weather gets warmer, it's obviously we're in the middle of a heat island, and it's very, very uncomfortable for people in the neighborhood. So a global tree strategy sounds like a really wonderful idea. Lorig?
Yeah, so last year, I had a bill that came out of exactly that issue, Wayne Avenue and University Boulevard, where just these huge, beautiful, mature trees were cut down. In our conversations with the MTA about them was that, of course, they were replaced based on the Forest Conservation Act, but they were replaced like 15 miles away. And the reason that was given was because, so it's like a 4-to-1 replacement or whatever it was, which is good from a overall climate perspective, but from a localized heat island effect issue, doesn't help the problem. And the reason that was given was that essentially on state property that remained, there was no place to put a tree that would eventually be a large mature tree, because that's where the purple line and the utilities and what have you was going to go. And so the bill that I put in required the creation of, originally it was purple line, but it became broadly urban tree program for all state highway programs, that they have to put together funding mechanisms and work with the community to replace trees in the areas where the trees were removed, on potentially private property, county property, like recognizing that a lot of times there's not going to be a place to put it in state property, state right of way at that point. But that they had to play a role in replacing in more broadly. And so a combination of that bill and another bill that created a program within DNR, we have two possible sort of funding sources, support programs, support people to bring trees back to Wayne Avenue. And so Chris and I were talking, the next step is to kind of organize the effort. And I had asked folks from SHA, from MDOT and from DNR to come to a meeting, whoever wants to organize that meeting, to talk about kind of the funding that would be available. It's not, they don't come in and just do it, like it requires some coordination, but there's funding and supports from these state agencies for the replacement. And obviously the community would know best where the trees could go. So if you have ideas for on school property, then we can bring MCPS in. If you have ideas on private property, so on and so forth. So, but I think that the next step would be, you know, when you all are ready for that conversation, I can bring in folks who have committed to me that they will come and talk about the options available.
One of the things just along those lines, if you are suggesting more cooperation and support by the state of the counties, one of the things the county's been complaining about, well, one of the things that the residents have been asking and the county hasn't really been able to address is the removal of stumps and the right of way. And so if the state can give assistance, financial assistance to the county to remove the stumps in the county right of way, we'd be able to plant more trees in the same watershed and nearby where other trees have been cut down. So I just sort of mentioned that to you. I thought of it as you were talking.
I'll ask about stumps. Yeah, I haven't asked about that.
There are a lot of stumps. And yeah, we're all, I think there's a lot of communities in Silver Spring. Most of them, in fact, are interested in sort of a broader conversation about trees in cooperation with the county. I belong to a nonprofit that came up with a financing mechanism for, well, basically for the Tree Montgomery program. And there's an incredible backlog for removal of stumps. There's an incredible backlog for planting trees that the county said it will do on private and public property. So we're interested in having that conversation. And I know that lots of people in our neighborhood are concerned not only about planting new trees, removing the stumps, but some kind of official program to remove invasive vines from the trees that we see in parks, county parks and state parks and along our highways. Carol had a question in the chat. I wanted to circle back before we forgot. And then Kelly, I wanted you to talk about your conversation with Joe Mojus at the State Highway, who was on the chat, the conversation that you and Chris organized in December, I believe. And he seemed to be a thoughtful guy. Can we ask them to come at 4 p.m. on a July afternoon to see how hot our heat island is? I'm sure we can. Carol, do you want to ask a question yourself, or should I just read it from the chat?
I can read it.
Oh, Carol Gilbert is asking about the increase in crime, particularly in downtown Silver Spring, Greater Silver Spring, and wonders if there is I think you touched on this before, is there a state role? I mean, I know that Councilmember Jawando last week had a meeting at Montgomery College where they were talking about a regional approach, DC, Prince George's County, Montgomery County, to trying to deal with some of the crime issues. Can you say any more about what the state is, or what the D20 delegation has been thinking about in terms of jurisdictional cooperation beyond ghost guns?
Yeah, and particularly with respect to them calling Veterans Plaza an open drug market, and there being 2 murders that were related to selling of drugs.
I'm not sure if you heard what I was saying earlier about the tobacco enforcement agency.
Yes, yes. No, I was focused more on the drugs and the murders.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is that most of the issues that we're seeing in downtown Silver Spring kind of fall under enforcement, which tends to fall under the county, right? And so to the extent that they are tied to the hookah bar, being open late, in some cases selling alcohol illegally and some, right, those kinds of things. That's where, in brainstorming with county leadership and Commander McBain, I sort of identified like, okay, here's the thing that the state could potentially offer. And so they've come in on this broader team that's looking at enforcement issues. But because the issues really are fall under local enforcement, there's not a whole lot more that the state can do. I do think that regional cooperation makes a lot of sense, and I would support those efforts. If there's a role for us, it tends to be more just because you've got the local enforcement agencies are kind of under the county or under the city of DC. And as I said, I really do think that the closing hours is a big piece of it, and I think that's a decision that has to get done at the county level. There had been confusion at one point. I was getting ready to put in legislation because for some reason folks thought that was somehow going to be done at the state level, closing hours. But when we looked further into it, it's very much under the county council.
Kelly, do you want to talk briefly about your conversation with State Highway, and maybe Lori could help us with that confusion that you and I talked about the school zone, the safe school zone?
Right. So I reread the email. So thank you, Lorig. What you've done has been great. So for those of you who were at the December 14th meeting where Chris presented, so Joe Mojis of the State Highway Association was by far, I would say, the most helpful of the three officials on the Zoom call. He was really the only one who I think took our concerns really seriously and offered some sort of a way forward to improve the pedestrian safety situation around Sligo Creek Elementary and Sims. And in the conversation, he noted that that area was not designated as a school zone in bureaucratic, terms. And so I followed up with an email to Joe about a month ago or maybe 6 weeks ago asking, could our school zone be recognized as a school zone to pave the way for school zone traffic enforcement? And Joe was very responsive and said, this can happen, it can be recognized as a school zone, but the enforcement and the recognition can only take place when the purple line is finished or in the ultimate condition. And so Lorig was copied on the message, and I sort of resigned myself to the fact that, okay, we're getting this recognition, but only, when the purple line is finished. And I was kind of thinking of next steps. And just last week, I was delighted to get the message from Rose, your chief of staff, saying that you had followed up with conversations and that the school zone will be officially recognized as such from SHA's perspective in June, and that will allow for enforcement. It was my impression that what will happen in June is that the signage will be put in place that will allow for the enforcement. The devices, I suspect, will not be installed until after the construction work is done. So I guess that was my one question. But really, I wanted to thank you for really taking the initiative and following up on this issue and really making it happen. So I've talked to parents and they're really excited and very grateful.
Yeah, thanks. So I can add to it. Thank you for bringing the issue to my attention. It's even better if you guys have time for a short story. Love it. I'll try to be brief, but here's the thing that as I it. And there's going to be more that we'll probably learn, and you may want to follow up with the police. So what happens is enforcement is always at a local level. So even issues like speed cameras, for example, are done by police, even if they are on state roads, right? And so that's, you always have this sort of difficult dynamic between a state and the locals, because it's state highway and they've got to design the roads better, and then the local agency enforces it. And so you'll get state highway say, well, the locals need to enforce it. But what the issue, as I understand around school zones, is the kinds of enforcement you can get if something is declared a school zone is very different than the kind of enforcement that you get if something's not a school zone. And so Wayne Avenue used to be a school zone when it was a county road. It became a state road at the SHA in order for the purple line to be built. And in the process, it lost that designation, right? Chris is nodding his head, I think, because I wasn't elected before it was a state highway. So is that correct? So
Yes, I remember it was I remember well when it was a county road. I remember how everyone seemed to be taken by surprise when the announcement came. Well, of course, since it's a state project, it should become a state road. That, in hindsight, I'm surprised no one saw that coming, but that was a big moment. And I realized then that dealing with state agency is a whole dramatically different situation than dealing with county agencies, which we had been up to this point. So that really threw us all for a loop.
So, so the first step was to get it to be declared a school zone. So I reached out to Joe, and he said the same thing, Kelly, that he said to you, that it had to wait till after the purple line. And I was like, that's really not acceptable. And what would even be the reason for that? And so I talked to multiple people, and I just started asking, like, can you show me in writing that you can't have a construction zone that's also a school zone? Like, is it in statute? I'll change it. Is it in regs? Is it in policy? Like, where is that? And people are like, oh, you need to talk to this person, that person. So I asked and I asked, and no one could produce it. And so finally I got a call, and as best as I can tell, the reason they don't normally, no one has produced anything in writing to this date, but the reason they don't normally make it a school zone while it's a construction zone is because they may need to move the signs around over the course of the construction. And I think, in theory, if I'm trying to kind of think about the reason behind that, if you have a 3-month, 6-month construction project, that makes sense, right? But when you have a construction project that's already taken 4 years and is about to take another 4 years, it's really unacceptable. And so I got the call that they were going to make it a school zone and put in the signs, but that the signs were probably going to have to move a couple times over the course of the construction. And I said, that's fine, as long as it's a school zone and you've got signs there that declare it as such. So that's expected in June. I called Commander McBain to talk to him about it and to say, look, this is coming. Can you start looking into what else do you need? And can you, like, what are the enforcement mechanisms? Because this is where you get into, like, even though SHA puts in the school zone, they can't put in the speed cameras. They don't have speed cameras. Like, that would have to be the local. So I'm just letting you know that, as you may want to also reach out then to him. So I just, my conversation with him was more of like, heads up, in about a month and a half, it's going to be a school zone. So to the extent you can look into what enforcement you can bring to that area, once you have the added sort of feature of the school zone, can you start to look into that? So I don't have any final answers from him, but it should add to the flexibility of what they can do once the official designation is there. I mean, I suspect it's a bureaucracy. I suspect we'll have to stay on top of it, make some more phone calls, whatever. But I think we're headed in the right direction, and to the extent that it's going to happen before 4 years from now.
I'm sorry. I just want to say, I really appreciate your determination to find the language or not that was preventing the designation. So your determination is really remarkable. Thank you.
Go ahead, Kelly.
So this is a huge improvement. And if there are things that I should be doing in June, I certainly will. I'll keep in touch with your chief of staff about it and see how the next, couple of months go. So.
I think, Kelly, if you're interested in working on it, I think the next step would be further conversations with Montgomery County Police, because the enforcement falls under them. And so if they tell you something else, like, oh, well, in addition to school zone, we need them to do this and this, like the sooner we know that, we can, but so I'm happy. I also have, as I said, reached out to them, but I didn't go into, we didn't go into detail about like what exactly they could do, but that's going to be the next step, because they're going to have now this framework of school zone, and then it's going to be on them to figure out what else to do with it.
Okay, thank you.
So just a little bit more on the school zone. So my understanding was that the school zone speed enforcement cameras were only operative during school days and school hours, and they didn't work on the weekends. Lorig, is that your understanding?
That could be. When I talked to Commander McBain about it, I was like, yeah, we're getting this, but it's not until June. And he said, well, if the school has activities over the summer, there may be ways that we can, do enforcement tied to the school zone if there's activities there over the summer. So this is where I think that the next set of conversations really is with the police, and that question would be among them. And, like, what other technical things do we need to make sure are covered? So if the school has activities on Saturday, does that make them do enforcement on Saturday, that kind of thing?
And we should have a healthy skepticism about the police enforcement. We've been asking for enforcement of traffic violations on Wayne Avenue, Dale Drive, and Sligo Creek Parkway for, 12 years, Chris? It's been a long time, and we have not seen any increase in enforcement with cars patrolling, pulling over people for speeding, and speeding is still a pretty significant problem along Wayne Avenue. And it'll be interesting to see how effective speed cameras will be on that stretch of Wayne Avenue when there's actually, trains going in each direction. The trains may slow it down to the point where it's not a problem. But 4 years is a long time to wait to have no enforcement and no designation of a school zone. So thank you so much, Kelly, for your work. And thank you so much, Chris, for raising these issues again, like you always do. And Lorig for following up. Anybody have any more questions for Lorig? It's 8:17. We might be able to finish by 8:30. I would like to show you my my little slideshow presentation with a little video. Paul Guinnessy is raising his hand. Paul?
Yes. So one of the things that they've been talking about, how I missed a little bit. They've been talking a bit about how there's these open days for the Purple Line contractors, the new one. And one of the words that struck me was the word design, as in they may be reevaluating part of the design of the network. Do you know anything about that?
I do not. Sorry, where did you see that? You read
So it's in one of their open house notices that they put out. It says, come meet us, learn all about who the new contractors are. And in somewhere in the paragraph, it said the word and design or design changes. So that got me wondering, did that mean that they were going to tweak the design at all?
I'll send it to you, Lorig. It's open houses that they're planning to have to introduce the new design build construction team. It went out April 19th, and they're going to have two on May 25th in the Silver Spring Civic building, and then on May 26th at University of Maryland Student Hall. So
yeah,
I'll just send it to you now because I have it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, potentially, I'm not aware that there's significant design changes coming. For better or for worse. But, this whole process is somewhat unpredictable, so.
Yes. Now, the reason I brought it up is because the reason I disappeared was to pick up my kid from the middle school, and the traffic of all the parents getting into the school was about 12 cars down Wayne Avenue and then turning right onto Dale. because we were told that you couldn't walk to pick them up. You had to drive in a car and then put them in the car. So that got me thinking again about how is this going to work when there's a train and a station just right outside the school. So
Yeah.
No, it's going to be a mess. It's going to be a mess. And while I'm thinking about it, two neighbors on Schuyler and Dartmouth have asked the Civic Association to support a traffic study on Dartmouth and Schuyler to sort of deal with that traffic when people drop off their kids and they're leaving, because apparently people are not paying attention to the stop signs and there's excessive speed. And we're expecting a traffic report back from them, from DOT and Montgomery County DOT in the not too distant future. Anybody else have any questions for Delegate Charkoudian? Well, then let me show you my video. And Lori, you say too, because you'll enjoy this. Can't minimize that. All right. Here we go. Park Hill Civic Association. Oh. Share the screen. Share screen. Share screen. Park Hill Civic Association. Slideshow. Slideshow. Can you guys see that? Well, not yet. How about that? Can you see that? Okay. Our meeting tonight. Our agenda, Lorig, neighborhood updates. Delegate Charkoudian, District 20 and her email address. And I will post this to the Facebook page and to the listserv. We had our Earth Day Sweep the Creek activity yesterday that was organized by Chris Richardson and Friends of Sligo Creek. These are some of the pictures that he posted to social media about the garbage they collected. And I think we had a pretty historic turnout. Chris, can you say anything about that?
We've had more, but I'm told that along the stretch of Sligo Creek, our turnout was the most this weekend. I just wanted to say that whoever does trash pickup in between creek sweeps is very much appreciated. When you go along Sligo Creek Parkway, where we've adopted the road, and you go into the trails close to Manchester Road and top of the road condominiums, there's really great trail keeping up going on there. I don't see garbage, and there's a tributary that goes into Sligo Creek in that area. And I picked up one beer can since our last sweep 2 months ago. So it's really green in those wooded hillsides away from the creek near Manchester Road. So it's really great to see that happening. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you so much, Chris. Wanted to give another shout out to Delegate Charkoudian, who pressed State Highway to do the restriping and bringing the condition of Wayne Avenue and Dale Drive back to some kind of normalcy. One's out of the windshield, one photo's out of the windshield of a car, the other one is from up by the school. But it's good to have the lines back on Wayne Avenue. Pedestrian safety, this is an issue that we alluded to before, and this is when Wayne Avenue going toward the elementary school and the middle school was completely blocked out with any signage. A lot of people noticed this. These are pictures by Annie Tolkien from Sligo Brandview, who's been one of our community leaders on pedestrian safety and access for people with disabilities. And Suzanne Ludlow, who used to work in Tacoma Park, Lorig, who took some pictures as well. So lots of people. In this case, people had to walk into that coned lane to get around that backhoe, and that's Carol's house up there on the left-hand side. I wanted to show Chris, this is the picture I was talking about. This is one of the pictures that Mike Madden showed us in 2008 when they told us what the purple line was going to look like when it was completed. And if you will notice, those look like pretty mature trees along Wayne Avenue. So this is the bill of goods that we were sold. Subsequently, they changed it to look like this, where hardly any mature trees. The fenced off station, which of course was not part of the original plan and the original representation to us. And of course, this is more what it looks like now. And just for those of you who were not living here, let's see if this video comes up. This is what the intersection of Wayne Avenue and Dale Drive looked like before the trees were cut down. And this is really what we bought into as a community when we moved here. Mature trees along the school campus. And let's see if this video will work. I'm thinking this is 2009, 2010.
Yeah.
And you can, so complete transformation of the neighborhood when they cut down the mature trees that were along Wayne Avenue and Dale Drive. So I'm glad we have this. Just so, and there's another video someplace I couldn't locate, but it was really quite spectacular.
And I have some still images of the pine trees along the school campus too.
And last but not least, for those of you who do not know, this is how you can contact the Park Hill Civic Association. So thank you very much, all of our officers. And so that worked out pretty well. I'm glad to see that the multimedia presentation was a success. We're coming to 8:30, and I think we can close our meetings. Anybody have any questions that they'd like to raise for Lorig, or any announcements that people have for the rest of our neighbors? I mean, I always will have some. Paul, is your hand up again?
Yes.
Okay, go
So
ahead.
it's just a brief note to say that Kate Stewart will be doing a meet and greet at my house on May 7th at 1 o'clock.
Okay, so apropos of a couple of things like that, I'm a board member of the Greater Silver Spring Democratic Club, and we're having a candidate forum for the District 4 candidates at Eastern Middle School tomorrow at 7 o'clock. Everybody is welcome. There may be a live stream. I want to remind everybody who does not know that the primary election has been postponed until the middle of the summer. I don't know who thought of that. Court of Appeals maybe to July 19th. So it may only be, 97 degrees, when they want people to go to early voting and to the polls. And I put out a note on the listserv looking for somebody, asking for a volunteer to be vice chair or perhaps chair of our local precinct at Sligo Creek Elementary School, 1350. If anybody is so inclined and wants to participate in that endeavor, please email me at alan.bowser@gmail.com. And then a question from Chris Richardson in the chat. He's talking about our new district. So those of you who've been paying attention, we were in Montgomery Councilmatic District 5, which really went from the DC border, Tacoma Park, all the way up to Burtonsville. But the county council, at the recommendations of a redistricting commission, has changed our boundaries. So we are now in Councilmatic District 4, sort of a butterfly district that goes from Tacoma Park through downtown Silver Spring, through Littonsville, Kensington to North Bethesda. So we have a different district. We're now thrown in Tacoma Park with North Bethesda. There was some controversy about that, but it is what it is. Once you get sort of like North Four Corners up to Burtonsville and over to Littonsville is the new reconstituted District 5. That includes Leisure World as well as the communities Fairland, Burtonsville, Spencerville. So they made some changes, and we'll put a link to the map. But we're District 4, and we have 5 or 6 candidates who are running in the Democratic primary. I think maybe one independent, maybe one Republican. So please pay attention to that. And one of your neighbors is running for clerk of the court again. So please take note of that as well. Anybody else have any other announcements for the good of the order? Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody else who's joined us. Thank you to our officers, Nina, our treasurer, Cheryl, our vice president, to Carol, our secretary, and very special thanks to Lorig Charkoudian, our delegate in District 20, for all the work that she does for us. She is the best. And I don't know if they keep record of this, maybe the most productive of all the delegates that we have in Montgomery County delegation and maybe in the whole state. She really is fantastic. And I urge you to go to her website, which we will send around again, so you can learn about all the other good stuff that she's done. She didn't really spend too much time talking about it, but the work that she's done around food security has been unbelievable and sort of unprecedented. The work she's done around energy has been incredible. The county executive always mentions Lorig when he's talking about climate action and the proposals that Montgomery County is making to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so he loves the community choice, and he counts it as a big feather in his cap as he testified at Annapolis on behalf of that bill. So Lorig, thank you so much for all you do, and look forward to staying in touch with you and keeping you posted on what's happening in our community. Motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
It's been first and second. All those in favor say aye. The ayes
Aye.
have it. Take care, everybody. And we will post this video tomorrow. You can share it with our neighbors. Thank you so much.